Okay, so for this week, we're going to be taking a look at Lab 6, which is getting into Chapter 4. So just as kind of a reminder, since it is going to be tomorrow, for the exam tomorrow, keep in mind that this is just going to be over chapters, as far as the book is concerned, chapters 2 and 3. Whatever we're doing for this lab for Chapter 4, that's not going to be part of tomorrow's exam. Taking a look at the directions for this week. So for this one, we're going to be dealing with a little bit of input validation. So it's going to be related mostly to either using a while loop or a do while loop, since these are the ideal loops for input validation. Specifically with this lab, we're going to be looking at dealing with one that performs a simple math operation, which is division. But one of the concerns with division is that in some cases, if your denominator is 0, so the number that's on the bottom of your division operation, if that's a 0, then you might run into some problems. So what we want to try to do is create an application that allows you to perform division, but does it safely. The way that it's going to handle that is by making sure that that number is not 0. So going through each little bit of this. So the purpose of this lab, is going to focus on input validation as it relates to performing division. You should be familiar with using either the while loop or the do while loop to check inputs provided by the user. For your task, you'll go ahead and create your project called DBZ, divide by 0, validation, and then your first and last name, for lab 6 and your first and last name. And then also make sure that you include comments summarizing the program. For each of these steps in the task, first you'll go ahead and import the, yes, this particular lab is going to be over chapter 4. So this is kind of the first half of that. So for step 1, you'll go ahead and import the JApp-Champagne class, and then you'll declare a string that will hold the user's input from each input dialog box you'll be providing to them. In step 2, you'll go ahead and declare 3 double variables. So 2 of these are to hold each of the different parts that you're going to be using for your division operations. That's your numerator and your denominator. And then you also have one for the result that you get from it, which would be the quotient. So those are your 3 double variables. So between steps 1 and 2, keep in mind, you're going to do your import, and then in total, you'll have 4 variables to work with in this lab. You'll have a string and 3 doubles. And then in step 3, you'll go ahead and display the first input dialog box to the user, asking for the numerator. So the numerator being the number that is on the top of your division operation. And you'll go ahead and store the user's input into that string variable, since that's what you would expect to get from an input dialog box. You'll then go ahead and convert the user's input to a double, and then store that into the appropriate double variable. And step 4, this is where input validation is going to come in, because this is where we're dealing with the denominator. So you'll go ahead and display the second input dialog box to the user, asking for the denominator. And then again, just like you did in step 3, you'll go ahead and store the user's input into the string variable. The part where things will be a little bit different is that now this needs to be included as part of a while loop or a do while loop. So you can go ahead and perform input validation by comparing the user's input to the string literal 0. So in some ways, this is a little bit similar to what you had to do in the previous lab, because it requires comparisons between different strings. The key thing to keep in mind here is that in the previous lab, you had to use, I guess you have one more day, so I won't quite give it away yet, but there was a particular method you had to use in the previous lab when you were making comparisons to see the order that your words would go in or your strings would go in. In this one, you're actually doing a direct comparison where you're trying to see if the user's input is actually equal to this string literal 0. So keep in mind that while you are doing a comparison, the method that you're using this time around is going to be a little bit different, since you're trying to check if they're actually equal to each other. So then if the user entered 0, you'll go ahead and repeat the request for the denominator, since we can't accept 0 as a valid input. Instead, it has to be something other than 0. If the user did not enter 0, then that means that we don't need to keep going through our while or do while loop. We can go ahead and just break out of that loop and move on to the next part of our program. So if the user did not enter 0, then you can go ahead and convert the user's input to a double, and then store that into the appropriate double variable. So then once you've handled all of that, we'll go ahead and actually perform our division. So in step 5, we'll go ahead and divide the numerator, the first input, by the denominator, the second input, and then store the resulting quotient into the appropriate double variable from back in step 2. And then you'll go ahead and display a message dialog box to the user indicating the quotient. And in this particular part, we're going to go ahead and also incorporate a little bit of string formatting from the end of chapter 3. So when you actually get that quotient and you display that in the message dialog box, you're going to go ahead and round that to 2 decimal places. Or put another way, you'd say that it's going to be formatted to 2 decimal places. And then in step 6, this is just a minor clarification to make sure that nobody forgets about this. Since this program is dealing with dialog boxes, remember that you still have to make sure that you properly exit the program. Okay. So then I'll provide a little example right here of some of the different input and message dialog boxes that you'll be using in this program. Basically, just to give you an idea about what message you might want to include in each one of them. So like these different requests you'll make, such as please enter the numerator and please enter the denominator, and then essentially make the message dialog box at the end look like. And of course, what it should look like with the formatting to 2 decimal places. So in this example, I did 100 divided by 3. If I didn't have formatting, naturally this should be 33.3, and that would keep going for something like 15 decimal places. But instead, because of the way that I've set it up, it's only to 2 decimal places. Okay. So then going through the criteria, the comments summarizing the program are going to be worth 5 points. Properly importing the JOption class and then declaring the variables for this program. So that's both steps 1 and 2. All of that's going to be worth 5 points. The first input dialog box, as well as the proper conversion, is going to be worth another 5 points. So that's referring to step 3. That one's a little bit more straightforward. This is something you've done in a few of the previous labs. Then the second input dialog box with the input validation and the proper conversion. Since this deals with what this lab is primarily focused on, this one's going to be worth 55 points. The division operation is going to be worth 5 points. And then the final message with the properly formatted string is going to be worth 25 points. Okay. So that's going to cover everything for the directions. In addition to this, I'll go ahead and do a quick demo with Netbeans. But before I jump over to that, does anybody have any questions so far about this week's lab? Okay, so if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and move over to Netbeans. So I've got the program put together already. So it's this DBZ validation. So I'll go ahead and make sure that I don't accidentally run the wrong ones. We've got both of these ready for this week. So we want to go ahead and make sure we run this one. A quick second to actually display the first. Okay, there we go. So the first input dialog box shows up asking for the numerator. So I'll go ahead and use the example that I had in the directions. So if I put in something like 100, I'll go ahead and push OK, and then I'll go ahead and move to the next one. It's going to ask for the denominator. For this particular part, I'll go ahead and demonstrate what it looks like if it doesn't pass that validation check. So if I put something like 0, so we know that the denominator can't be 0 since we can't perform division with this. If I go ahead and push OK, it's not going to move to the next part. Instead, it's just going to repeat this request for the denominator. So I'll go ahead and give it a valid input. So say something like the 3 that I had before. I'll go ahead and push OK. And then it'll go ahead and move to the message dialog box telling me that the quotient is 33.33. Okay. So that's going to cover the demo for this week's lab. Does anybody have any questions at this point now?
I do have a question regarding the Netbeans IDE that I submitted my last week, but it was just like, I don't know if you got my email. It was just like a regular file. I was not able to figure how I do the zip file. I don't know if that's matter or not.
Oh, I think I did get the email. I might have missed responding to it. But yeah, if you send me just the Java file from the Netbeans project, that would be enough for it. That's perfectly fine.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. And then on the assignment, I review the assignment that's due on the 15th, correct? there's one question. I don't know if can I ask about the assignment right now?
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask about it now.
Okay, I'm just pulling the assignment right now. I have one question that I was trying to find the. Let's see here.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and give you a quick second on that and answer another question that's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Jacob, for your question about the assignment of the exam, so if you double check in the announcements that I send out each week, there's one from about 2 weeks ago that technically should have been only 1 week ago, but there were some problems that we ran into that kind of prevented us from having the exam last week. But if you look in those announcements, you can see what the format of the exam is supposed to be. It consists of things like a matching section, some multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank, and short answer questions. So I guess to kind of answer the other part of the question, I would say it's more like the assignment than it is like the labs. But there are a couple of other sections that aren't really like either of those two things.
So I have the assignment here. I think question 2 says on the clock example given on both the book and the lecture videos.
Mhm.
So I reviewed the lecture and I tried to go to the PowerPoint and all that. I couldn't figure the example there. There's a way that you tell me where it's located exactly.
So hopefully I'm not forgetting this. It should be in the one about for loops. If I missed it, I'm pretty sure I included it as part of the explanation, but if I missed including it there, it's definitely in the book. If it's missing from the video itself, I think what I could probably go ahead and do at some point is add another thing to the course materials with the actual clock example that I'm referring to, just to make sure that everybody has access to that. So yeah, so if you don't see it in the video, then I can make sure that there's somewhere else that you can find it.
Okay, please, yeah. If you maybe later on, if you find out it's not in there, just let us know where so that I can review it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make sure that if it's not there, I'll probably include it in next week's announcement, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Were there any other questions about the lab or maybe even the assignment of the exam tomorrow?
So the exam will be for 2 hours. When you start the exam, you just have to finish. You can pause and leave and come back, right?
Right.
Okay.